Hello and welcome to the 50th anniversary of the Pagan Federation Academic Conference. My name is Jenny Uzzell and I'm going to be speaking to you about RE. Worth saying right at the beginning that I'm only speaking about RE in schools. So that is secondary schools, further education to some extent. Higher education, universities, is a whole different talk, and hopefully we'll do that one day because that's also fascinating. But today I'm just going to be talking about RE in schools and also just about RE in schools in England and Wales. In Northern Ireland and Scotland there are different laws governing RE, and I'm not an expert on those things, so I'm just going to be limiting my talk to England and Wales. So who am I, first of all, and why am I talking to you about this? Before we go any further, I think it's probably worth saying that I have never done a pre-recorded talk before, and if anything goes wrong, I apologise. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen on and off during this talk. So to start off, by way of introduction, who am I and why am I speaking to you? So the title of this talk is What is Religious Education and Why Should You Care? You being a pagan who is a parent or a teacher or just has an interest in education or wants to see paganism more properly integrated with mainstream life in the UK today. So if that's you, I'm suggesting you should care about RE. This is me. I am the Education and Youth Manager for the Pagan Federation. That's a relatively new role. I have more than 20 years experience teaching RE, and about 18 years of that was of head of department in RE in a secondary school, including sixth form. I've also held several roles for the REC. The REC is something we're going to be talking about quite a bit as this talk goes on. It's the Religious Education Council for England and Wales. It's a body that is made up of a number of stakeholder organisations, including educational charities and educational bodies, as well as individual religious traditions that are represented there, including the Pagan Federation. I and the president are delegates to that, so we go and represent the Pagan Federation at the REC meetings. But I've also worked for the REC in capacity as I sat on Task Force 2 in 2013, which was one of 4 task forces that the REC had reviewing the RE curriculum with a view to making various recommendations. Task Force 2 was particularly concerned with public examinations. I was also a mentor on the Resilience programme following that. Resilience was an initiative of the REC that aimed to help teachers dealing with controversial issues in RE. So how to enable and equip teachers to teach effectively. I think they were thinking particularly about issues around Islamophobia, but really anything that would help teachers who are sometimes not very well trained not to shy away from controversial religions in RE. And I'm also and continue to be an assessor on the Religious Education Quality Mark for the REC, which is a programme that they have devised to acknowledge and recognise outstanding performance in religious education in schools. So I go into schools and help them with that. As I mentioned, I represent the Pagan Federation on the REC. I'm also a senior examiner, GCSE and A level, specialising in Hinduism and Buddhism and also in the philosophy and ethics of religion. I'm the chair on my local sacre, and we'll talk a little bit more later on about what a sacre is and why you should care about that as well. And I am passionate about why RE matters. It breaks my heart. I see a lot of comments both on pagan sites And every time RE comes up in the newspapers, there's always streams of comments underneath it saying, we shouldn't be teaching RE, it's outdated, let's get rid of it. And it breaks my heart, because I genuinely believe that when it is taught well, it's one of the most important topics that students study. Very rarely, once you leave school, do you have to do calculus or a lot of the other things to do with maths that are not numeracy. But I would say that throughout your life, you need to be a critical thinker. And that is one of the skills that good RE gives you, as well as various others, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm a Druid. I'm a member of OBOD, the British Druid Order, and the Druid Network. And I'm active in all of those fields. And I'm currently studying for a PhD at Durham University, looking at modern Druids in Britain and death ritual. So that's a snapshot of who I am. And I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. So I'm aware, as I said, that a lot of pagans would like to see the end of RE, and this I find very upsetting. A lot of people believe that it's outdated, that I think is a belief that is very often based on what RE was like when they were at school. When I was at school, it was all Christian. It was really religious instruction rather than religious education. There was an expectation that you would gain certain spiritual truths from it. And I think that's what a lot of people remember when they think about RE. It's not like that now. It shouldn't be like that now. If it is like that now, somebody is doing something wrong and probably illegal. And as it was taught when I was at school, yes, absolutely, it's outdated. It's no part of a secular society and we don't need it. But we do need what is going on today, or should be. We very much need it. There's also a feeling that RE reinforces the normalcy of Christianity, that, you know, Christianity is the starting point when you think about religion. And that has unfortunately become a truism. It is to some extent true that when we think about religion, when we categorize something as religion, we're very often thinking about Christianity as the model to do it with. And it's the same in examining. It's something that I and a number of people have tried to move away from in examining. That, you know, for example, when setting an exam on Hinduism, you don't try and fit it into a Christian shaped mold, because that doesn't work. So there has been a tendency to do that, and there is a reason for that, which we'll mention later, in the form of the 1988 Education Reform Act, which had a section on RE, and it moved RE for the first time away from being Christian religion instruction. So it was a huge step in the right direction. It made use of the work of a scholar at Lancaster called Ninian Smart, who classified religions into what he called the 6 major world religions. World religion is a loaded term, actually. It's not a neutral term, and it only works if you define it in relation to something else. So what is a religion that isn't a world religion? So there are problems with it. The major problem with it, as far as RE is concerned, is that the only religions that it really engages with are Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism. And it pretty much acts like they are the only religions that exist. And therefore, in 1988, it passed into law that they were the religions that teachers needed to be concerned with. And as I say, it's a huge step forward, because it's the first time they've had to be concerned with anything that isn't Christian. But at the same time, it is obviously very limited. So it is true at the moment that around 2/3 of religious education is centered on Christianity, which is required by the 1988 Education Act, which states that RE must be aware of the fact, must reflect the fact that Christianity is the major religious tradition in Britain, historically and in contemporary practice. also, of course, reflects the fact that the Church of England is the established church, a position that makes Britain almost unique in the world. And that really is outdated, but that's a talk for another day as well. Another thing that I hear a lot is, well, if they're going to have religious education, they're not representing my religion, why aren't they teaching paganism? That's something I want to come back to later in the talk, and also that there has been recently perhaps the biggest shake-up in RE since 1988, and that quite possibly radically reshapes the landscape for paganism. So I'm going to come back to that later on. And the other thing that I hear is that we shouldn't be teaching religion in schools because religion should be a private matter. It's for, homes and families. And I have, I think, two things to say about that. Firstly, no, it isn't. Religion is a public category. It's something that is debated in Parliament. It is something that the media is deeply concerned with. It's something that features in our public lives from day to day, all the time. You are going to work with people, socialize with people, go to school with people from a huge variety of religious backgrounds. The fact that we have our religious freedom protected in law is a consequence of the fact that religion is something with which the law concerns itself. So yes, religion is wider than just a private matter. What you believe is a private matter, absolutely. What you do within the law is a private matter, but religion as a category and religion as a way of thinking and religion as a way of making policy is not a private matter. And that can be demonstrated just by the fact that the Druid network, for example, was recognised as a religious charity by the British Charities Commission in 2010. That was the result of a public consultation, and it is a public legal status. Whether you agree that it should have happened or not, religion matters, and it matters in the public sphere. The other thing that I would say about whether religion should be a private matter is that the world we live in is hugely diverse. And in order to negotiate that hugely diverse world without doing and saying some things that are either really not very bright or really not very kind, a degree of religious literacy is really a very useful thing to have. So that's what I would say about those things. I'm also going to say that things like the fact that that religion is, that the Church of England is an established religion and therefore has a privileged legal status in Britain. Obviously, I'm not terribly pleased about that. One of the ways that we challenge that sort of thing is by having as many people as possible in as many places as possible with a high level of religious literacy. And one of the ways that we do that is through good RE. Now, we all have our horror stories about what bad RE looks like. I have plenty of my own horror stories about what bad RE looks like, having spent a large number of years teaching it and leading departments. I think one of the worst things that ever happened to me as head of RE was when I was given somebody to teach RE, was put onto I loosely call it a team, because she had some free periods and therefore had some time in which she could teach, and she went to church and was therefore clearly an appropriate person to teach RE. That was not one of my best years. I got very stressed. She had a moral objection to teaching Hinduism, which unfortunately was on the Year 8 curriculum for that year. So we had a few discussions about that. And she also had very little working knowledge of religion as a category. She didn't know what the debates were in religion. She didn't know very much at all about anything that wasn't Protestant Christianity. So, this is the sort of thing that happens. The other horror story that I had was when a letter arrived in my inbox from my head teacher, who was not a close friend of mine, I'll just say, saying that there was going to be a missionary team coming into school, and they'd asked if they could come into assemblies, and that this was clearly a matter for me. So I more or less wrote on the back of the envelope that my concern was with the academic study of religion, and that this was clearly a pastoral matter, and that if he wanted my personal opinion on the subject, it was many different kinds of no, but it was in fact his problem, not mine. That was one of the things that led to me eventually leaving teaching. But we all have our stories about what RE looks like when it goes wrong. And hang on, just having a, there we go. When RE goes wrong, it generally looks a bit like this, and this is particularly problematic if you happen to be a pagan student or pupil, or a parent or guardian of a pagan young person. The biggest single problem that we have in RE is the wrong people teaching it. Teachers that are not specialists in religion, or who have not been well trained to be RE teachers. What the original specialism is actually less important than the level of training that somebody has received as a specialist RE teacher. There is still an assumption in schools that anybody can teach RE. And because it is a subject that deals with such a multitude of extremely sensitive issues, extremely complicated moral conundrums, I would say that it is probably the subject that you least want a non-specialist teaching. You need somebody with a high degree, not only of religious knowledge, but also emotional intelligence and a critical capacity to be teaching RE. And this is probably the biggest problem that we have. Another problem that is particular for pagans is the level of misunderstanding that exists about paganism and witchcraft, with teachers who maybe are Christians, or who maybe have very limited religious understanding and have ideas about what paganism and witchcraft are that are informed by fiction or film or TV, or unfortunate incidents from the past, such as the Cleveland witch scare, where a lot of children were wrongly taken into care, and are basing their understanding of paganism on that. There's also teachers, I think this is particularly an issue in primary schools, that just have a non-critical acceptance of negative stereotyping, and particularly, you know, your typical Halloween stereotype of a witch. I'm thinking in particular here of the use of Roald Dahl's The Witches as a reading book in primary schools with no critical engagement by staff. I know that has led to problems for people. Or teachers that have assumed that if a child tells them they're pagan, that means they have no religion, and all sorts of issues around misunderstanding or just a general lack of knowledge about paganism. We've already mentioned the fact that for a lot of pagans, they're concerned that most of the teaching is on Christianity, and we've talked about the reasons for that. And also in assemblies, in common worship time, which is also still a religious requirement. Don't get me started on that. There is a requirement that it is to be, and I quote, wholly or mainly of a broadly Christian nature, which is not necessarily helpful. There is a little bit of wiggle room for certain schools that are in, for example, areas where most of their pupils are Muslim, but it's still a little bit, okay, it's a lot out of date and it needs sorting. Where there is non-Christian teaching, it is related, as we've said, to Ninian Smart's model of the six world religions. And this is a particular bugbear of mine, being a specialist as well in Hinduism and Buddhism, that in secondary schools, almost always, you will see that they're teaching Abrahamic religions. So Christianity, Judaism and Islam, which means that pupils get a very skewed idea of what the Dharmic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism look like, because when they're studying them, they're at an age when they're really not engaging with them very deeply at all. And I think that this is a problem. And in fact, there has been a review recently by the Hindu authorities who have found exactly the same conclusion and are currently engaging with Sacres about that. So that's one positive sign. So the overall result of this is that pagan pupils often wind up feeling excluded and marginalized. They might be derided. They might feel that, you know, they're coming to religious education quite enthusiastic and finding that they're never learning anything about their own religion or their own tradition, or even discussing issues that arise from them. And at worst, they can actually feel victimized by other pupils, or as an absolute worst case by the teachers. So looking at all this, it's very easy to understand why a lot of pagans have a very negative view of RE and would really, you know, rather get rid of it altogether. However, there is light on the horizon a little bit. Hang on. There we go. So in 2018, a group of commissioners, I think there were 12 commissioners, from a variety of stakeholders. So there were representatives of many different religious traditions. There were also academics and there were educationalists, and they had a really good look at RE. They took statements from all stakeholders, ranging from pupils to universities, and all points in between, including the religions themselves and the government bodies. And they tried to reach some sort of snapshot of where RE was and where they would like it to go. And they found that whilst there was some excellent RE in some places, and that this was being acknowledged and it was being recognised by things such as the Religious Education Council's Young Ambassadors Scheme, and the REQM, the Religious Education Quality Mark, it was a bit of a lottery. Church schools did it better than other schools, if only because they recognised the value of RE. But in some places it was quite dire. There was not sufficient time being given to RE. This is partially the result of a series of disasters that were not in any way related to Michael Gove, that included things such as RE not being included in his new IBAC qualification, not being included in results that were reported from schools and used for their feedback and their sort of positioning. Did away with the GCSE short course, which is something else you really don't want to get me started on. And there are a lot of things happened at once that were very detrimental to the teaching of good RE. And the commission found that these had indeed had a very detrimental effect, and that RE was a bit of a lottery, and in some places it could be very bad indeed. As a result, in September 2018, they published their final report, Religion and Worldviews, The Way Forward, and I very strongly recommend that you have a look at this. It is a huge document. There is, however, a functional report, a functional summary that is not a huge document, and that is very well worth a look if you're interested in this. They made 11 key recommendations about the way forward for RE. I haven't listed them all here, but the three that I think are probably the most relevant for pupils and parents are these. First of all, they recommend a change of the name to Religion and Worldviews. And the fact that they have used the singular religion is very significant indeed. What that means is that they are recommending a move away from the phenomenological study of religions. So in other words, moving away from, these are the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the 6 Ks of Sikhism. These are the 10 commandments. Go and learn them. If you know these things, then you understand Islam, Christianity, Judaism. It's a move away from that approach to religion, that what you are mostly trying to do is to learn facts about the religion. And why that is so important, I'm going to speak a little bit about in a minute, because it represents a fundamental change in the way we are viewing the study of religion. And also the inclusion of worldviews. The inclusion of worldviews is significant because we're moving away from saying, in effect, that if it doesn't involve God, it doesn't belong in an RE classroom. There are many things that don't involve God that absolutely belong in an RE classroom. The obvious example there is Buddhism. But there are others. And this, there have been attempts within RE to include humanism, for example, for a long time. And it has always been very difficult to do. There was an attempt a while ago to include humanism on a GCSE paper, and it wasn't very successful, again, because of this idea of trying to fit it into a Christian viewpoint. So, why don't humanists believe in God is not a particularly interesting question. There are many more interesting questions that could be asked. So this is opening up religion to look at more than just the 6 religions, and more than just religions that are theocentric, that involve God. It also includes a recommendation for a national entitlement to the study of religion and worldviews for all publicly funded schools. And what they mean by the national entitlement is a minimum amount of time dedicated to the subject to be absolutely protected by law in a way that is completely unambiguous, for it to be taught by suitable people, that is, teachers who have sufficient knowledge of religion, who are being constantly trained and undergoing continuing professional development in the subject and the pedagogy of the subject, and are enabled to deal with complicated issues and controversial issues, who are not going to shy away from difficult questions in RE. It also means that they expect the teaching of the subject to be academic and critical, not devotional. If schools, faith schools, for example, wish to have devotional lessons or wish to use their communal worship time for that, that is absolutely fine, and that is a matter for them. But in the classroom, the study of religion is to be academic and is to be critically engaging. And that have that enshrined in law is hugely, or might be hugely significant. And then of particular interest to me, when GCSE and A-level specifications are next reviewed, this should be done in the light of the national entitlement. This is glorious news to me. And I can only say I am looking forward to that time. SACRAs, I will say, and again, I'm going to come back and explain this in more detail. SACRAs are already using this as a baseline as they're beginning to plan new locally agreed syllabuses. So this is starting to have an impact now. So, what are worldviews? Well, they're ways of looking at the world and making meaning of it through belief, practice, ritual, what people do. They include things that have not necessarily been included in religious education before, specifically non-religious worldviews, which can include humanism, but there are others as well. And humanism, again, is not a monolithic, single, unchanging thing. Humanism is not the same, for example, as atheism. Or it's not, it's included under the banner of atheism, but it's not synonymous with atheism. And this is the sort of thing that hopefully we're going to begin to unpack in lessons. It includes the study of indigenous religion for the first time. That has huge implications for the way that the subject is taught, for the way that pupils are taught to think about what is and isn't religion, about how pupils engage with issues to do with religion and ecology, religion and life and death, religion and deity. All of these offer new ways into those things. It also includes religions in Britain that are many and varied. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that there are more than 6 different religions in Britain, which comes as a great relief, I'm sure, to all of us. So it includes minority religions, new religions, including, but by no means restricted to, Baha'i, Rastafari, and paganism. Oh yes, I hear you say. Theoretically, then it includes paganism, but what would actually happen if somebody tried to teach paganism? Well, the answer is that they are actually protected by this document, which has disappeared. There we go. No, stop it. There we go. There we go. This is taken from the second appendix to the final report, paragraph 10. And it says, in order to understand the full diversity of religious or non-religious worldviews, pupils may also benefit from awareness of a broader range of worldviews, depending on the considerations above. And then if you go down to the highlighted part, historical and contemporary paganism in the UK may also be included, as this is both growing and influential beyond those who identify as paganism. Now, this really does make my heart sing. It means that any teacher who tries to claim that they can't teach paganism, they shouldn't be teaching paganism, this is actually black and white in writing for the first time, saying, yes, paganism is an entirely appropriate thing to teach in this context. It's not saying they have to teach it. It's not saying it's going to be appropriate for all classrooms, for all pupils at all times. It is saying that there are times when it is going to be appropriate, depending on the local communities, whether paganism is heavily represented in the local communities, depending on the makeup of the school and the class itself. If there are pagan pupils in the classroom, then it is specifically saying that they need to feel that they have a stake. And it goes on to say actually later in this document that they should have a stake. They should not feel that they are being excluded from what is being taught. So this is wonderful. It may interest you to know that there is currently legally nothing to stop schools teaching paganism. And a lot of people don't know that. The fact that it isn't written into their locally agreed syllabus does not mean that they cannot teach it. But this is the first time that it has been in black and white that it is an appropriate thing to teach. So I'm seeing this as a major opportunity for pagans to come forward and say, okay, this has now been acknowledged as a legitimate and a helpful thing to teach in RE. How can we help you to do that better? How can I help you to help my child in this context? So I think that's, hugely useful. What does that mean? It means that there is no such thing as a typical Christian or a typical Muslim or a typical pagan. Those things simply do not exist. And if you are studying Christianity purely by looking at the Bible or looking at what the Pope says, if you're looking at Catholicism, or looking at any form of dogma or religious teaching, that is not helpful. That is not going to get you where you want to be. Because that's not the experience of Christians, and the existence of Christians is different in one place to another, and between one tradition and another, and between one individual and another. And this worldview approach takes that seriously. Religious identity is fluid. It changes over time. It's complicated. It's plural. And this is really another way of saying the same thing. What you believe, how you identify, changes over time. In a way, it's exactly the same as gender identity. It changes, it's fluid, it's not fixed, it's not one thing or the other all the time. A person can move from one religion to another, or can adopt ideas from a number of different religions. They can have dual belonging. For example, in Druidry, there is a strong tradition of people who identify both as Druids and as Christians. So, you know, and this is an acknowledgement that you can't put people in boxes and expect them to stay there, because that's not how human beings behave. It takes account of the emotional and experiential aspects of religion, not just facts and phenomenology, sorry. If you study the 5 pillars of Islam for a term, do you understand Islam? No, you don't. You've got a starting point, but you don't understand Islam. You don't understand what it feels like to break the fast at the end of Ramadan. You don't understand what it feels like to contemplate the night of power. And it's the same in any other religion. Religion is as much about emotion and experience as it is about belief. And this, for the first time, starts to take this seriously. Acknowledges that religion in Britain is far more complicated and diverse than the 6 world religion paradigm. And it acknowledges the absolute necessity for adequate recruitment and training of teachers. And that is the right teachers. It is crucially important that we have the right people engaged in this. It also allows for the possibility of what Suzanne Owen, who is a senior lecturer in the study of religion at Leeds Trinity University, what she calls religion literacy rather than religious literacy. That rather than teaching pupils lots of facts about different religions, and don't get me wrong, that's important, there's a place for that, we teach them to have conversations about what we mean by religion, how we define religion, how we use religion as a category, who uses it and in what different ways they use it, how they use it against each other, how religious traditions use it, even in terms of not accepting it. A lot of pagans, for very good reasons, specifically reject the term religion or religious, using spiritual instead. And this would allow people to have those conversations. Why do some people reject the term religion? Why is that important? Who else is using this term? Governments, charity commission, the media. How are they using the term? How are they using it differently? And why does that matter? So in other words, engaging pupils in a critical study of the idea of religion and how it's used. And that is only made possible if we adopt this worldview type approach to world religion and to religion and worldviews. If we adopt this model, we could be looking at a very bright future for RE, not only in schools, but also in the wider society. It provides us as pagans with a much firmer base from which to protest where schools are not adequately dealing with paganism for our children, and where they are misrepresenting paganism, either in schools or in the media. This gives us the possibility of far better educated people, religiously speaking, who can see and understand and call out these things, and also gives us a firmer basis to go and say, actually, yes, you should be teaching paganism. It's really important that we engage with these things. So this, it has to be said, is a recommendation to the government. It hasn't been adopted in full at the time, although lots of different ministries have made a lot of the right noises about it. Everybody's saying good things about it, but nobody's doing it. And they're not doing it really because it requires a commitment of time and money and energy. And to put it mildly, the government has been a little bit distracted recently. But if we can get this adopted and working in schools, it will be the biggest change in a generation to RE, and one that works hugely to the benefit of paganism in this country. And to everybody else. And I would say would also work to the benefit of wider society, because it gives us people who think better. This is good to think with. And this is why I am suggesting that this is a good way forward. Having said that, the situation as it exists at the moment is not a disaster if it's done well. As I said, it is not in any way difficult for a school to justify the teaching of paganism now. So, to wind up then, what is the Pagan Federation doing about all of this? How are we representing you in this way? How are we engaging with religious education and doing it better for pagans? And what can you do to make it better? So, let's go back to a screen share. There we go. What's the Pagan Federation doing? Well, we're engaging with the Religious Education Council and any other relevant government bodies when they come along. I, for example, am a member of ARIAC, which is the organisation that oversees religious education inspectors and advisors. And we are presenting the pagan position when we're asked for it, which is actually quite frequently. And through the REC, then we are feeding into working with and advising the government, because the REC is the body that the government turns to when it wants to talk about RE. We're providing advice to schools and parents, where schools come to us and say, I would like to teach something about paganism. I have a pagan pupil in my class or whatever. Something is happening in the area. I want to engage with it. I don't know how to. We are giving them advice. And likewise, where parents come to us and say, you know, I would like something to happen in my school. I would like my school to acknowledge my child's religion. It's not working. What can I do? We're there to offer support and advice and to liaise with schools if necessary when that happens. We are in the process of producing and distributing online resources to help teachers so that they can get accurate information about paganism. This will hopefully be on the Pagan Federation website before too long, and there are already resources available on RE Online, which is an online resource that RE teachers use. There are schemes of work and there are syllabuses and there are resources there to teach them about paganism. And of course, they can contact us at the PF directly if they want to. We are compiling a list of suitable people who are prepared to go into schools to speak to pupils about paganism or to engage with them in other ways. I mean, the technology has changed so radically in the last year and a bit that online visits to schools are now a possibility in a way that they weren't very recently. Or facilities maybe on the Pagan Federation website where pupils can send in questions about paganism and have them answered by an expert. So there are all sorts of ways in which we ourselves as pagan people can become a resource for our pupils. And we are supporting the REC in strongly urging the government to adopt the recommendations of the core report for reasons that I think I've made clear. And finally, what can you do? If you are concerned about RE in a school, if you want to be involved in making it better, what can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is read the core report. There's a link to it there. If you Google Commission for RE report, you will get to it. You will also get to the functional summary, which is a much shorter document, which has all the important information in it. You can write to people, your MP, the schools minister, the Minister for Education, urging them to adopt the core report and to consider it. I think there is also an APPC that is dealing with religion and religious education, and you can contact them as well. You can volunteer as a school governor, or you can sit on your local sacre. Now, I said I was going to come back to the issue of what a sacre is. If you're not familiar with the term, RE is unique in the country. It's organised in a totally different way to any other subject. So there is no national curriculum for RE, and I think that that surprises some people. They often say, you know, why isn't paganism on the national curriculum for RE? The obvious reason is because there is no national curriculum for RE. RE is organised completely differently. Each local education area has what's called a SACRE, which is the Standing Advisory Committee for RE. And it is made up of a number of stakeholders, teachers, council members, and representatives of different religions. I'm the chair of my local SACRE, and I am there as a pagan. So there is plenty of precedent. If you experience difficulty with this, please do get in touch with me. There is plenty of precedent for pagans on SACREs. They have got not a leg to stand on if they're trying to say that you can't join because you're a pagan. The SACRE advises the local authority on religious education. It has something of a mentoring role and a monitoring role for local authority schools, of whom there are now very few. And it also sets the locally agreed syllabus, which is the syllabus for RE that area has to follow if it's a local authority school, or can adopt if it wants to. And as I said, our local SACRE is starting to revise, do the 5-year revision of our locally agreed syllabus. And we're using the core report as a starting point. So this is genuinely starting to have some real impact on RE in schools now. So yeah, get involved with your local SACRE. Talk to your child's school about where they can find accurate information on paganisms. And if you're not sure, drop me a line and ask. Offer to speak to a class. If that's something, it's obviously not something that everybody is able or willing to do. But if you are able and willing to do it, offer to go in and speak to your class. Take artifacts in for them to look at that you can talk about. Maybe if they're doing a project on ecology or something like that, say to the teacher, would you like me to come and give a pagan dimension on that for you? And very often teachers will be delighted to hear from you. You will need DBS clearance if you're going to be alone with pupils, but for this sort of thing, there is absolutely no reason why you should be. If the teacher is with you in the class, that is absolutely fine. And finally, if you have any difficulties, if you encounter discrimination, if you need further help or advice, get in touch with me. You can reach me on this email address, education@paganfederation.co.uk, and I will do my very best to steer you in the right direction. And likewise, I'm around today if you have any questions, or email me with any questions and I'll do my best to answer them. And as I say, I think there was a little bit of silliness in the middle of that with the internet connection. I apologise for that, but hopefully we're all back on track now. So thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the day.